Okay. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Craig Pasta, Jardula, Fiorella Isabella. It's truth time on the Truth Wire. Why did you close your eyes and like roll your eye? Because I said it's truth time. I mean, it is truth time, but it is.
That's not why.
All right. Why?
You said Fiorella Isabella. That's not my name, but yeah.
No, I said Fiorella Isabel, and I. You just heard the and the end. I just said it quickly together. Fam, I'm wearing my Soprano shirt because we have a good guest coming on today. If you haven't seen it, I have like 7 Soprano shirts, but this is one I like. It kind of looks like a little bit like the Duran symbol, but it's not. It's like a little Russian-y. But there was an episode a couple times. The Tony Soprano had to work with the Russians. Dennis, our good friend, the Russian, used to love to watch those episodes. And we would talk about it, the Russian mob doing business with the Italian mob in New York and New Jersey. It was fun stuff, fam. Anyways, listen, the reason why I said truth time, because I think you get a different perspective from us on this show than you do from everybody else. And I really mean that. I mean, there's a lot of people. I've been watching a lot of Judge Napolitano because he does have people like Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern on, who I think are the ex-leftist spooks. Him with John Kiriakou are the 3 that I would consider to be like the leftist spooks. But even their perspectives, Scott Ritter's perspective, McClintock, all these other people that are anti-imperialist and are common sense ex-generals or military personnel, they still don't come from a different perspective than we do, right? We go a little bit behind the scenes, deep down the rabbit hole. I think there's kind of like what people would kind of say there's like a truther element to it, like what's going on behind the scenes, not just what's in your face, that you get over here. I mean, I've been loving to do these shows right now when we talk about Russia, Ukraine, because there's so many other things you never hear people talk about, fam, how Syria could be tied in to this whole situation. But you and Vanessa have done great work on it. So when I say truth time on the Truth Wire, fam, I'm talking about that.
Okay, fam. Well, yeah. I mean, there's various levels of perspectives here, and we can just go ahead and wind the music down, because otherwise I feel like I'm at the nightclub.
Jayme likes to go extra with the music. By the way, thank you to Jayme on the 1s and 2s. I didn't even mention his name. Sorry, fam. Don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, so it was Victory Day, right? And it was a very beautiful, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous parade. And Russia really outdid itself with the decorations and everything else. But the significance of that, of course, I've talked about. I was on Nico's show, or on Nico hosting. He was hosting for Galloway, and Nico did an excellent job hosting, to the point where I said, Nico, Galloway should be careful because he outdid himself. And so we talked about that. We talked about when I went to this concert, right? And the significance of what was shown there, the history and the decades and decades of suffering, and remembering the sacrifices and the suffering, and how that is actually very much what is happening now, but in a different part of the world. When we look at what's happening in Gaza, in Palestine, and the entire region of West Asia, when we see what's happening being done by Israel, which didn't exist at that point, right? Which is something that people really need to realize. That was before Israel was a thing. And now we're at a weird point where I think, and I've said this before to my audience on Substack, it's if we don't learn the lessons that history, that are thrown upon us, the history repeats, it rhymes, and it creates variations of the same poem, essentially. And that's what I think we're witnessing now with the Zionism that's replaced the Nazism, and both are supremacist ideologies that rely on believing that others are inferior. And I really talked about that connection. There's that connection of what's happening in a much bigger context than we think. And so it was a very, very big set of few days. A lot of things happening on the background. It's not just about these events, but it's also about the geopolitical tensions, the geopolitical chessboard, the grand chessboard, as we say. And it was also about the conversations that are being had in regard to Russia, Ukraine, in regard to as well the U.S. and Iran relations. It's not at all coincidental that Stephen Witkoff is also in charge of these conversations with Iran, as well as the conversations with Russia, Ukraine. So that to me is not coincidental at all. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of developments in that, because as I've said before, I still maintain a couple things. One, that the United States does need either this conflict to wrap up, and it needs to manipulate it as a win for itself. Trump needs to come out as a peacemaker. He needs to come out as someone that's really wrapping up Biden's mess and moving on. That's what is needed for the Trump administration. And the other thing is that Russia does want this to end. They've been more than willing every single time to have this end, but permanently. They're looking for a permanent solution. Will they get one? I don't believe so. I don't believe they will actually get a permanent solution right now. I think they'll get told that this is going to be permanent, but I think the United States is going to continue trying to bring this back in the next administration, in the future,
or a couple of administrations down the road.
We'll see.
Maybe. No,
absolutely,
or a couple of administrations down the road.
Yeah,
In other words, fam, what you've said before is at the end of the day, they might pause, they might take a time out, but there'll always be an attempt from, and I believe this 100% too as well. You know, like I said, after Boris Yeltsin, when they got a taste of that after the USSR fell, and they were in there, the Clintons walking around Moscow with the mink coats on. We're getting our piece of the pie. I think they will pause maybe at this time, but they will always try to balkanize, try to corporatize Russia, get their fair share because the United States owns the world, fam. You know, and I just want to point out before we do bring on our guest, Mark Sleboda, who's with us today, and it's going to be interesting because this is the first time he's not coming on the conversation couch. This is the first time him doing the TruthWire with us, so that's going to be great to hear him say what he says. We love him. And I'm going to push Mark today. I'm going to ask him some questions after we let him do his thing, because I still think he's one of the best in the game when it comes to this. He really lays it out in a way we can understand what's going on. And I'm going to be interested to hear what he has to say. And I can't wait to share it with our audience. But let me just say this much. Growing up in America, at one point when I watched a lot of football, I'm 52 years old. Jerry Rice was not always my favorite football star. Now, by far, he is. Because every single time he scored a touchdown, fam, he would turn around and hand the ball to the referee. Nowadays, they made it so that they had to pass a rule in which they allowed the players to celebrate, right? To have this mentality. We're not humble anymore as a nation, as a society. You know, Donald Trump, with what he said, we won the war by far. If it wasn't for us, it would have never happened. It's just an example, really. It's just a microcosm, I should say, of what Americans are like and what is being praised and what is being glorified here. We are a society that has no class. They are not humble. They want to win. They want to be out there. It's just, it was a shame what Donald Trump did. And seeing what the leader of Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, did I say it right?
Burkina Faso. Yeah.
Not Faso, right? We got to meet some of the leaders when we were in Nicaragua at one point where they were there speaking, which is great. Seeing that leader, the way he went out there and said, you know, and in Putin's speeches, hearing Ray McGovern talk about it, like thanking the Allied forces. I mean, why can't we be like that? Even in his last statement, Donald Trump is talking that nonsense. And it really talks about who we are. And it shows you in America. I mean, I know there's censorship on a lot of the media that we do where they're putting some of us down and lifting some people up. But a lot of problem is the people who live here in the mindset of the young folk, fam, what they've been taught and programmed. It's individualism. You know, it's narcissism. And it's through our society, and it really is a shame. That's why I say I like Jerry Rice. He turned around after a touchdown, didn't do anything with his legs or spike the ball. He'd hand the ball to the referee. We used to have a saying for some of us, what I feel like humbled Italians, act as if, we would say, act as if you've been there before, act with some class. Let's bring in a guy who has a lot of class. Ladies and gentlemen, You know him, you love him. He's one of the guys. He's been the most on this show by far. We started rocking and rolling with this guy a long time ago. He was a constant Sputnik and RT contributor, and we'll ask him about that with this whole situation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Sleboda joins the show.
Greg, Fiorella, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on the TruthWire.
I like the enthusiasm, Mark. That's wonderful. Love it.
Rah, rah, rah.
Mark, we're going to make it big. We're going to get you out there. We're going to start with a question. And to quote Christopher Walken in the More Cowbell skit with Will Ferrell, when we ask you this question, we want you to use the room. Use the room. Go out. Express yourself. There's a lot to unpack today, Mark. We have this whole situation now. They're supposed to meet supposedly in Turkey this Thursday. There's been talks where Putin has said he'll deal directly with Zelensky. He wants to end the bloodshed. You have Zelensky saying he'll agree to sit down and talk with no conditions as long as there's a ceasefire that it's honored. The Russians have always been against the ceasefire because they're not looking at it as a ceasefire. They were looking at it as just a pause in which the Ukrainians, can reload, re-weaponize, regroup, and then go back at it again. So my question to you is this for real? And if it is for real or if it is for fake, what do we expect moving forward? Mark Sleboda.
First of all, may I just say that Christopher Walken is a deity of supernal proportions, and that was a phenomenal skit that you are referencing, where it was I believe it was the Blue Oyster Cult, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cowbell. More cowbell.
Gotta have more cowbell.
Yeah. But Mark, use the room. Stretch out. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, my first reaction is every time we hear that narcissistic, self-aggrandizing, puerile man-child go off about, oh, what a peacemonger he is, and oh, he's concerned about the beautiful people, oh, the bloodshed, in screaming all capital 7th grade loose on the internet letters. I can't help but remember that the man just launched 1,000 air and missile strikes on Yemen. I guess they're not beautiful people. I mean, is that what it is? You know, the Yemenis not so beautiful. Ukrainians very beautiful. I don't know. But the hypocrisy of his bleeding heart statements is a little bit too much, and I'm really afraid every time I see another one that I'm going to roll my eyes so hard that I'm going to have retinal detachment or something of the sort. What is going on right now is an elaborate, you can call it a poker game. I'm not really sure I like that analogy, a dance, or better for Americans, I think easy to understand. There's a game of hot potato. There's a game of hot potato going on between the Europeans and the Kiev regime on one side and Russia on the other. Look, there is not going to be any diplomatic settlement. There's no chance in hell of there being a diplomatic settlement now. Certainly not now to this conflict. Maybe at some point down the road when the Kiev regime, if it ever does, which I actually doubt, admit that it has been defeated, and Europe admits, that at least their proxy has been defeated, even if they won't admit they have been defeated as well. There's no chance. So somewhere down the road, right? 6 months, a year, 2 years, who knows? But they're not interested in peace. They're not even interested in a ceasefire. If you'll remember, up until just over a month ago, both the Europeans and the Kiev regime were dead fast against the ceasefire, but they read the room, and they have turned on a dime and now support a ceasefire. But the Europeans are always quick, I mean, we're talking the British and the French, to talk about how as soon as there's a ceasefire, they're going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, right? They've called them a peacekeeping force, then a reassurance force. You know, what they are would be a human tripwire. I mean, the British military generals, the brass, have spoken anonymously, you know, the active duty to the Telegraph and admitted outright, look at, the British military is so deteriorated, there is no way we could deploy to a intensive combat with Russia in Ukraine, right? We don't have that capability. And neither did the French as a surety. And they said, we actually don't even have the capability for a sustained deployment of any significant number of troops that just sits around in West Ukraine. We don't even have that. We don't even have the human tripwire ability for any real length of time. So what they're doing by making these threats, right, is ensuring that Russia will never agree to a ceasefire. Russia is not predisposed to agree to a ceasefire anyway, right? We've seen peacefires. We've seen Minsk 1. We've seen Minsk 2. We've seen the Istanbul communique where Russia withdrew troops from the center of the country, from around Kiev. We've seen now count them, 3 ceasefires in the last few weeks, right? The Trump arranged or energy infrastructure ceasefire that the Kiev regime never adhered to in the slightest. And then Russia unilaterally declared an Easter ceasefire and a Victory Day ceasefire. And both, I mean, the Easter ceasefire was violated some 5,000 times by Kiev regime forces. And I don't even think they bothered to count on the Victory Day. So any ceasefire will be used, as it has previously, just to rearm, forcibly conscript some more troops, and continue the fight. Whether in the short or the medium term, the best that can be hoped for is a frozen conflict with no eventual political settlement. And they believe that they can wait Russia out, right? They can continue the conflict, that it might have spells of inactivity, but they believe that they can still win in the end. And there's precedent for that. Russia won the war in Syria and lost the peace catastrophically. I mean, Al-Qaeda and ISIS under Turkish dominion now run Syria, right? And are committing genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Alawite and Christian, because Russia and Iran took their eye off the ball. And a combination of refusing any settlement, U.S. sanctions economically strangled the country, and then the infiltration and co-option of the Syrian military brass and various political, regional, and government figures by Turkish intelligence, U.S. intelligence, more than likely Israeli intelligence, etc. I mean, that we saw the collapse of Syria in what, 10 days? 10 days, I think. There was hardly even any fighting. So Russia cannot become overconfident, because even a victory on the battlefield is no guarantee of, a long-term geopolitical strategic success. So that's important. Russia has no interest in a ceasefire, because it would just be used to continue the conflict as soon as it's convenient for the Kiev regime in the West to do so. It must be said that Russia doesn't even want peace right now, right? Except on their terms, right? This is true of everyone, though, right? No one wants peace except on their terms. And everyone wants peace on their terms, right? That's the reality of this conflict. The Trump administration wants peace on American terms. And the Trump administration is going through this theater, this cosplay, that they are some third-party mediator rather than, the proxy master of this entire conflict. And no less a person than the U.S. Secretary of State, the neocon Marco Rubio, admitted that openly. This is a U.S. proxy war against Russia. He said it. I mean, he admitted what we all have known for a long time outright. But in trying to bring the war to a close on American terms, Trump is going through this pantomime theater that the U.S. is some kind of third party, interested mediator attempting to bring the two conflicting sides together. And for the moment, Russia is willing to tolerate this pose as long as they believe that it gets them what they want. So what everyone is doing right now is maneuvering, because everyone knows that there is not going to be a diplomatic settlement. And everyone knows that when Trump's big peace project completely fails, and the U.S. proxy regime in Ukraine will face eventual regime change of the regime change, then that's going to be a very bad look for him, right? He will be either the man that surrendered Ukraine to Putin or the man who lost Ukraine to Putin, right? That's going to be inevitable at some point, as long as the war ends during his term. So if his peace project fails, he's going to be unhappy. And right now there is a game going on between the EU and the Kiev regime on one side and Russia on the other for a fight. Most of the fight is about influencing Trump's febrile little mind. Although some of it is also about, global public diplomacy and perception. Everyone wants to make sure that when that hot potato lands, the hot potato of blame for why Trump's peace push failed, that lands in the other party's hands. That is the game that's going on. Everyone, maybe, I think even in the Trump administration, but who knows? But I believe that everyone knows that there is not going to be a diplomatic settlement. This is going to fail. The game now is simply the blame game, right? Because look at everyone knows that Trump is extremely susceptible to manipulation and suggestion, right? Putin is trying to manipulate him. Zelensky's trying to manipulate him. The European leaders are trying to manipulate him. Every leader in the world, except maybe for China, who doesn't seem to be bothered, doesn't feel they have to be bothered at making the attempt, is trying to manipulate and influence Trump. Every member of his own administration with their own agenda is attempting to manipulate and suggest to Trump. And he likes this. He likes playing the God Emperor of mankind, that everyone comes to his court and pays court to him, right? And the person that he talked to that convinced the most in the last 15 minutes is what passes for policy in this administration. So they're both attempting to make him essentially angry at his peace push failed at the other side. So Trump has pushed two things big in the last couple of weeks. One, the demand for an unconditional ceasefire immediately, in all screaming capital letters, and direct negotiations between the Kiev regime and Russia. So the Europeans and the Kiev regime turned on a dime on being against the ceasefire and for it, knowing that Russia will never agree to a ceasefire, especially if they're threatening to put European troops on the ground when it happens. They jumped on that. And so they have demanded, right, that Russia agree to an unconditional, immediate 30-day ceasefire, which Russia has already refused. They were refusing a ceasefire back before Trump won the election in the United States, well before that, when he was just campaigning, right? They've said it again and again, and they haven't changed their position at all. We're not giving you a breather, right? We're not getting you a chance to rearm them, build up your military industrial complex, whatever. It's not happening, and Russia has not changed from that position. So they feel confident pushing this, right? That Russia will refuse, and then the blame will be on Russia in Trump's eyes, in Trump's mind. There's another possibility that they another tactic for this. They may have Zelensky unilaterally declare a 30-day ceasefire, and then just let Russia break it and say, look, we agreed to a ceasefire. He didn't. After all, that is what Putin did over Easter and Victory Day, largely in an attempt to influence Trump. There might be some other reasons, but that was Russia unilaterally declared a ceasefire that the Kiev regime didn't follow. It's about perception, right? It's about this diplomatic game for owning Trump's mind. Now the Russians seize this and they respond with a call for immediate direct negotiations with the Kiev regime unconditionally, right? Well, that is something that Russia has said before. In fact, it's pretty much always been their position. They're always ready to talk, right? They're not necessarily willing to agree to anything except their own terms, right? Because they're winning. But they've always said, we will happily sit down and talk with anyone who wants to talk, including the Kiev regime. And they point out that it was the Kiev regime who walked away. So what is new about Putin's play is he picked a day and a place in Turkey, in Istanbul, on the 15th, right? That was his play. So he's deflecting and misdirecting from the Kiev regime and European demand for an unconditional 30-day ceasefire with his own, throw of the gauntlet and saying, well, let's have those direct talks this week, right? We'll send our team, you send your team. That is their attempt to shift the onus of blame onto the Kiev regime side, assuming that the Kiev regime, Zelensky even passed a diktat, forbidding any Ukrainian officials from entering negotiations with Russia.
Mark, I don't mean to interrupt you, but would you also agree, though? I mean, the one point, I agree with everything you're saying, but there does seem to be a little bit different language or behavior coming from Putin himself when he says he wants to get this bloodshed stopped himself. Isn't there a little bit movement from Putin on this? I mean, at least it's an opportunity for the Trump administration and the American media to take advantage of it, to say, look, even Putin has come around and says he's having enough of the bloodshed. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to get your point on that as you're telling this particular.
Yeah, there is, but there's not in the way you think, right? Over the weekend, for the first time, Putin referred for the first time to the conflict as a war. First time, right? Russia is escalating. Russia is escalating militarily across the board. You're going to see huge military movements. Russia is preparing for more Oreshnik strikes. Putin maintains a polite diplomatic niet, right? When he says no to the ceasefire and deflects. But in reality, Russia is preparing to go all out. They see the Kiev regime military forces as being extremely fragile right now, and they're willing to entertain these diplomatic games, right? Because if the U.S., even if there's no diplomatic settlement, if the best possible result from the Russian minds would be Trump gets frustrated and it gets fed up with Zelensky and the European leaders, both of whom he hates personally, right? He views them as political enemies, that Trump will walk away. And if that will mean the U.S. walks away for the conflict for several years to one degree or another. And that will make eventual Russian victory less costly and take less time, right? Russia was already winning when Biden was all out shoveling Pentagon warehouses into the Kiev regime. But Russia, the cost and the time of Russian victory will be lessened if the U.S. walks away. Therefore, it is to, however slim the chance of their actually being successful on it. Russia's interested in, in at least attempting, right, this diplomatic game. And even if there's no hope of it with Washington, then at the very least, it kind of reassures Russian allies and BRICS, not China so much, they don't care, but India and Brazil and South Africa than others, that Putin is at least making the attempts at diplomacy. So that's where I see this going. And the big question is now is, does Zelensky show up on Thursday? He suggested actually that he will show up, right? Because with this law forbidding any officials from negotiating with Russia, he later said, well, that applies to everyone in the country but me. So that's kind of him throwing down a gauntlet then. But there's still an open question about whether he will agree to these talks without Russia agreeing to a ceasefire. At first, he suggested that he wouldn't on his own social media post. And then his gray cardinal chief of staff, whom Yermak, whom many people actually considered to be the real political power in Ukraine, he suggested that in a statement that Zelensky would still go to Istanbul himself, whether Russia agreed to this ceasefire ultimatum or not. We'll have to see how that comes out. I think the most likely scenario is right now the Europeans and the Kiev regime are talking and plotting about how to avoid this whole thing. So be prepared for a false flag, some type of provocation, another Bucha, which was used as an excuse to pull out of Istanbul communique talks. And that will be used to say, oh, Putin committed another atrocity. How can we possibly talk to him? Back to the war.
Mark, it's interesting to hear you say this because, being in Moscow, it seems like a lot of the Russian media are supportive of the whole Trump administration and have been pushing this idea that that it's possible now with Trump, that peace is possible. And I've been seeing a lot of analysts and a lot of people go that route, that this is perhaps the way to go, that this is perhaps the only time, even though Russia clearly doesn't need it. Russia has been winning, as you've said, on the battlefield. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is then, what is the end game for Russia then? If they're not going to accept any proposal that's not 100% their needs, which is what I think so as well. I don't think they're going to accept anything less than what they've demanded. Then they're going to continue winning on the battlefield. They're going to continue fighting Ukraine. How can Ukraine continue if they aren't going to have the full support of the United States if Trump walks away? And how can they just perpetually drag this out? They can drag it out, but how much longer can they drag it out? And how much further could we see Russia go in? Of course, we're looking at Odessa, Kharkiv, we're looking at that as well. But how do you think this is going to play out then if there isn't a resolution in the next few months?
Yeah, so, first of all, I mean, Russian media, much like American media, usually takes their cues from the government, right? I mean, they usually take their cues from this. I think if you consider serious Russian strategic military analysts, they will tell you, and I will tell you straight out, the Russian military is about fed up with this ceasefire games, because every time they give the Kiev regime a day or two where they're not advancing, the Kiev regime is taking tactical advantage of that to either improve their positions, or make counterattacks and the like. So the Russian military is there. they understand that Putin is playing a diplomatic game, but they're about tired of this diplomatic game. So the first thing is that Russia is going to finish taking what its terms are now, which is the remainders of Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. Right, Lugansk is 99% already Russian. I think there's like one small hamlet or something that the Kiev regime controls. That's not a question. Donetsk, of course, is where the majority of this conflict has taken part so far. Russia is moving very strongly in multiple directions. In the south, on strangling Pokrovsk. In the north, on strangling, cutting off the supply lines to Seversk, which is a northern stronghold. And then, meanwhile, they're still moving in on now this last Kiev regime defensive line, which is the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka agglomeration. And they're already moving into the outskirts of Konstantinovka right now. Now, I believe that all things being what they are, by the end of this year, Russia will have fully recovered, or just about full, for all intents and purposes, fully recovered Donetsk. However, at the same time as they will have taken Donetsk, they're also moving into Dnipropetrovsk region, right, west of Pokrovsk, right, a whole new region. They're now, as of yesterday, or at least the reports from the ground yesterday, which may be another day or two behind, the Russian forces were now 1/2 of a kilometer away from the Dnipropetrovsk region. Russia is already moving into Sumy region from Kursk region. Having kicked the Kiev regime out of Kursk, they're now moving down into Sumy. Now, at the beginning of the conflict, Russia, that was one of the ways they went through Kiev. Go down through Sumy city, and then, a little bit to the southwest, the highway to Kiev. So if Russia moves into Sumy, and there's also seems to be build up to the west of the Kursk region on the Russian sides towards the Kiev region of Chernigov, where is another way basically towards Kiev. So Russia is looking to open a whole big new northern front. Russia's also making advances in Kharkov, and Russia has started crossing, right, the Dnieper River in the south in the direction of Kherson city. Now, there's a question of whether they're doing this in small boats. The Kiev regime says they've gathered over 300 boats for this, and they've begun sending diversion and reconnaissance groups across. And there's two possibilities here. One, this is largely diversionary, that they are simply trying to stretch out the Kiev regime forces' manpower woes even further by making them keep troops around Kherson city on the other side of the Dnieper River. And the other possibility is that if the Kiev regime doesn't respond and reinforce that area strong enough, then they'll turn it into a real offensive to take Kherson city back. Russia withdrew from Kherson city in the autumn of 2022. And also Russia is prepared for a major advance in the Zaporozhye region through Orehov and towards Zaporozhye city. So by the end of the year, Russia could have either taken all of the territories that they say are theirs, and what need are negotiations about those four regions then, right? So they can just say, look, we've already taken it. But Russia has also said, this has been said by Putin, that if the West doesn't agree to Russian terms that include those in the next couple of weeks, and this was already several weeks ago, then things will be set in motion, and Russia will recover more historical Russian lands. Odessa, Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, right? Basically the whole east bank of the Dnieper. Now, as to what is an end game, I got to be honest with the goals of denazification. I prefer to say debanderization because it is the specifics of Banderite fascism that is the neo-Nazi flavor of the Kiev regime, dating back to the Nazi collaborators in West Ukraine from World War II and their adherence to that fascist ideology. And the terms of the demilitarization. This is something that Russia can actually negotiate on, depending how things are going. But as far as how things are going, how fervently the West continues, despite the quite obvious military defeat in this war of attrition by not only the proxy regime in Kiev, but by all the West and beyond the West, it must be said that they've looted the entire world of military supplies to try to win here. But there was some room for negotiation there. But in my mind, whatever the Kremlin may still want, I do not think that this conflict will ever in the long term end until this regime is removed root and branch from Ukraine, not just from Kiev, but from West Ukraine as well, because otherwise this will just be used as a weapons platform, a de facto weapons platform by NATO, future generations of Ukrainians under any continued Kiev regime rule will just be made into a NATO warrior case against Russia, right? I mean, Azov and C-14 have already now for years been brought into the schools to indoctrinate Ukrainian children to hate Russia, right? To beat them for speaking Russian or listening to Russian music.
Yeah.
I saw you. That is, yeah. That's something that Russia cannot tolerate this regime living next to them on Ukrainian land. It will always be a security threat. So I don't believe, whatever the Kremlin hopes or not, that there will be any conclusion until Russia is forced to militarily occupy all of Ukraine, however long into the future that takes. And a lot of that will depend on, continued military support. The Kiev regime can still forcibly conscript 18 to 25-year-olds, which they haven't done in a large way yet. They can still conscript women. They've brought it up continually. They are willing to continue this war as long as they can. Manpower is perhaps their biggest problem for the moment because Joe Biden pumped them full of a lot of weapons. And it has to be said that the Trump administration continues the flow of weapons to Ukraine. Yeah. First of all, there is all of the Pentagon contracts, right? Not everything immediately came off the Pentagon shelves. A lot of it was long-term contracts with the U.S. military industrial complex, artillery shells, air defense missiles, things like this, so that whatever is produced in a month gets automatically sent to the Kiev regime. That continues. Also, in the last 2 weeks, Trump has signed off on either the purchase of weapons by the Kiev regime or allowed the transfer of American weapons from Israel or Germany to the Kiev regime. So basically, I'm almost positive that what we're going to see within the next month or so is Trump, as the administration will see it, being left with no alternative but be returning to the Biden administration policy of sanctions and arms supplies as much as they can follow. And then if the U.S. continues that into the future, there's the possibility this conflict could last another year or two. But the Kiev regime is increasingly having problems. They can't defend everywhere along the contact line anymore. The war of attrition, that a lot of people do not understand what a war of attrition is. They've been raised on Hollywood style conceptions of military action or the U.S. wars in the the 1990s and the early 2000s of the U.S. beating up on practically undefensible third world countries and terrorists. They don't understand what a near peer conflict is, and a war of attrition. And it has to be said that American military generals and strategy have become so arrogant with their belief that they will always have massive air and long range strike superiority. They really look down on a war of attrition. It's not something they even consider. They consider it a part of an antiquated past, and that their Jedi art of maneuver warfare will always guarantee that the U.S. military, wins any conflict. Well, there have been a few voices in Western military analysts who have pointed out that it is exactly this thinking, this guiding of the Kiev regime, and the New York Times revealed the extent of U.S. involvement in this conflict, with a control of the entire conflict from the operational to the strategic down to the tactical level. Throughout this entire conflict, the U.S. has directed everything out of Germany, everything the Kiev regime does. It is their failure to understand attritional warfare and what they've gone into here that has led them to this point where the U.S. is low on so many crucial stock of weapons. They can't engage in a conflict with Iran because they don't have enough air defense missiles left to defend Israel and all their military bases across the Middle East from Iranian retaliatory strikes, with Iran's quite significant now missile, ballistic missile, cruise missile, hypersonic missile, maybe, and drone attacks and the like. I mean, Achilles aircraft missiles, the shortage and the low production rate of anti-aircraft missiles is right now the U.S.'s Achilles heel. And they were already short of them, Patriot interceptors before this conflict started, right? Because of the Saudi war against Yemen for several years. And Saudi was forced, the U.S. actually looted other Middle East countries and made them send their Patriot interceptors to Saudi. That was before this was reported in the Western media. Yeah. And then head into today, and the U.S. just can't keep the Kiev regime in air defense missiles, right? Much less, keep an inventory enough of them for an actual air and naval and drone war with China that they really want in the West Pacific. So it's the U.S. military industrial complex that can't keep up, and Russia that has attrited not just the Kiev regime, but the U.S. and all of NATO through this. And it's something that the politicians are still refusing to come to mental grips with.
Yeah. Well, first off, let me say that I hope you're wrong, right? I know you hope you're wrong too, as well. A peace agreement that could be reached would be awesome, right? Like less killing.
No, Russia does not want peace. Russia wants victory. Russia does not want peace.
Russia saying either way, regardless, right? I think we all want
the conflict over here, but on Russia's turn.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And what you said is that the Trump administration is going to have no choice but to kind of digress back to the Biden administration's policies of sanctions and whatnot. And I know that some of us here were really hoping it was going the other way. I think I bought into the play, you know what I'm saying, about it possibly going the other way, sanctions being lifted. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Here we come on out like they're not the Oompa Loompas, but the little people coming and dancing, and we're happy again right now.
That is.
What is it? What family?
Are you talking about the Wizard of Oz?
Yeah, they're not the Oompa Loompas. They're the Wizard
of Oz ones, right?
Yeah, no. The small people coming out and singing, "She's dead," and Dorothy with the house. And we were hoping for that moment, but I have to be honest with you, because people told me I was a little black-pilled or cynical for feeling the same way that Mark, I think, has felt for quite some time, because I've been following you when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, we've been following you for a while. In fact, the way I got up to speed in 2015, I think it was I went back and I watched a lot of your old school crosstalk episodes. I followed yours, and I believe it was I can't remember what Kevin Zees's old information, his thing was, but those were the two outlets I followed to get up to speed to find out what was going on. And I was very proud that the Conversation Couch was able to be one of those leftist shows to get out there and really talk about what's going on, to kind of scold all our fellow Democrats that being an anti-imperialist means being an anti-imperialist across the board, that we shouldn't have this Amy Goodman democracy now mentality of saying that the Russians are junior imperialists. No, I mean, this is the United States, and NATO's approaching on their border. But getting back to where I said we kind of agreed, and people would say they were nihilist or black-pilled or skeptical, is the fact that I don't see a way of Russia not taking Kiev. I mean, the Banderite streets, right, that are named after the Banderites, they're in Kiev and West. And if you really want to denazify, and like Fiorella has mentioned before, if they pause now, it's just a pause. United States is going to get back at it. The West is going to get back at it. They've been doing it since 1991 in Ukraine.
They've been doing it since the 1950s.
Exactly, right?
Operation Red Sox.
Yes. So it's been going on for quite some time. With that being said, do you honestly see the war only ending if Russia takes Kiev? And if they do have to do that?
Oh, I don't think the war will end if Russia takes Kiev.
You mean it's going to go on even further after that? And what does that mean? Oh, you mean like then NATO will get into it in Poland and all that other stuff?
It's possible. There's two possibilities. Either NATO will get into it directly, or a guerrilla war will be conducted out of Poland into Russian-held West Ukraine. Back in 2022, in March, I did an interview with several other alt media analysts and commentators on Consortium News, and we were asked our predictions about how long this conflict will take, and a number of other shall we say blowhards at the table said, oh, this will all be over in 2 months, right? Russia will win, we'll roll them over in 2 months. And they asked me, and I said, this will be a forever war. This war will never end truly. Right, there may be periods of frozen conflict or whatever, but the Ukraine is between its internal and external balance between East and West. It was Humpty Dumpty on the wall, and Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the hegemon's horses and all the hegemon's men can't put Ukraine back together again. And it must be said that this is not a good outcome for Russia. Even if it's forced to take Kiev or forced even further to take all of Ukraine, that is a terrible outcome for Russia. There is no good outcome, right? There is no good war. John Mearsheimer, the American IR theorist and political scientist that everyone should have read. He has called it, the inevitable result is an ugly Russian victory. And I think that's a great way of terming it. There is no good choices. There is no good outcomes. There are only less worse outcomes for Russia or for the other side. Like how I can't even conceive of the cost of rebuilding Ukraine after this conflict is over, right? Russia doesn't have that money. I mean, it would take decades.
Bring in the Chinese.
Yeah, everyone always says that. The Chinese are
doing it everywhere, Mark.
The Chinese are really tight with their money. Let's be honest about that. That's how they got to have so much money. Is they're not. They don't spend money for ideological causes.
Yeah, you sound like my mother talking about rich people in Boca Raton. Why do you think they have so much money? Because they don't spend it, Mark Sleboda.
It's
Mark. Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask you a last question since we've been here a while with you.
There was some minerals. How much time do you have?
I'm going to ask him a question.
We have to talk about Israel with Mark.
Oh, you want to talk about? I didn't know you wanted to talk about Israel with Mark.
Of
I thought he
course,
was
I
just
want to hear
Russia.
Mark's opinion on Israel. Please.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
real quick, the minerals deal is essentially just a way to get Ukraine to pay back the United States. It's a complete and total
No, it's a nothing
colonization of
it's not even this.
but what is so then what do you think now that the US has more stakes in Ukraine that they would just allow Russia to continue encroaching on their assets and their resources and their territory?
No, I think they're going to continue. They're going to return to the policy of pumping arms and sanctions against Russia, right? First of all, we don't even know what entirely what is in this deal because only 1 out of 3 documents have been made public, and even the Kiev regime's rubber stamp parliament, the Rada, was made to vote or ratify it without seeing the other 2 documents, right? But what we know of it, it's not really. It's first of all, it's far more than a minerals deal, and at the same point, as far as we know from what we've seen, it's not the complete colonization bill that we saw earlier. It is essentially a really hyped up investment fund, similar to what the U.S. set up for Iraq and other countries it was military involved in. Now, that's certainly not going to show any immediate returns, not for anything like, maybe a decade plus, right? If the Kiev regime actually won the conflict, right? The U.S. might see some returns on that. Certainly not. What this does is, it's a kind of the U.S. Pissing on Ukraine like a dog as its geopolitical territory. And also contained within is a vehicle for the U.S. to deliver weapons to the Kiev regime, for the Trump administration to do so. And that will be counted as investment in the Ukrainian economy. And I believe that ultimately what they're laying the groundwork in case they need it to provide some cover to the few people in the MAGA movement who actually, let's say, care about Ukraine rather than just the persona of Trump. And say, I'm not providing weapons to Ukraine. I'm providing investment, right? This type of sleight of hand. It's a big slush fund where things are going to happen. And almost certainly one of the things is more arms are going to be shoveled into Ukraine. But yeah, it's a little bit of the U.S. to have a little bit more skin in the game. And if they were even seriously thinking about walking away, then they wouldn't have pushed this thing through.
Yeah, I think it's more to it than that too as well. I just want to also point out that, and even Marjorie Taylor Greene, which we're going to get into right now, because once, we've been having this conversation, and I brought up a tweet from David Icke because I think David Icke shares some of the same kind of mentality and opinions about what's actually going on, which when I said I'm going to press Mark Sleboda today, I got a question for him. Hold that for a second. But when it comes to the minerals thing, and Marjorie Taylor, it's coming. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she mentioned, why do we care about the minerals over there? We have minerals over here we haven't even tapped into.
There's not a lot of minerals in Ukraine even. There really isn't. It's all hype. It's nothing. Rare earth minerals aren't even rare. And
but here's the thing.
They've never been extracted in Ukraine because it's not profitable to do so.
Well, it's not even that. It's cost a lot of money to extract them, and America doesn't even have the necessary means to extract them. The one country that has the necessary means to extract them is who? The Chinese.
China. So
if somebody can go to Donald Trump, because remember, in Afghanistan, he wasn't going to pull all the troops out. He was going to keep a base that was the base closest to China to agitate them. So I think somebody got into his ear, Mark, and said, hey, man, we can't let the Chinese get those minerals, too, as well. And that was part of the whole thing, and then he can brag about it regardless. We're going to play a video for you real quickly. How much time do you have, by the way?
Another 20 minutes, I guess.
Good. Because I really want to get your opinions about this. And I know Fiorella's got a lot to say just by judging her tweets over the last couple days and hours when it comes to this whole Israel situation. And once again, I'm not just standing behind my partner. We both feel this way. I want you to look at the way they're trying to spin this, because after the Marjorie Taylor Greene tweet and the little shenanigans she pulled too as well, which I agree with a lot of her tweet, other than the fact the way she looks at immigration and migration, that will never agree with those conservatives or the populist right, because the way they look at it is just ridiculous. But, you know, she was talking about the fact that why do we have to go and do all these things and fight these wars for Israel and whatnot? Look at this video, because this is the spin now, Mark, because then even the New York Times got into place where everybody's going, oh my God, Trump hates Putin. Trump hates Netanyahu. He can't stand him. And they have all these leaks and interceptions. And I'm going to do my Bernie Sanders imitation going, what does it even matter how he feels about him? Because he's going to give them everything he wants, which is my two-part question. Number one, do you buy into it? We'll play the video right now. Get that video up, Jayme, the first one in that section, in the Israel section. And number two, do you think that Donald Trump really has free rights to do whatever he wants? Or do you believe there's another entity that sits behind the United States government and tells them what to do? Jayme, where's the video? There we go. Let's get this video up. This is the way they're trying to sell it now. Do you buy this? Here we go.
This is the headline for the New York Times today on May 9th. Yesterday, the news broke that the U.S. and Israel were cutting ties, and for the first time ever, we are seeing a negative news article about Israel, specifically claiming they're not our ally. Now, all of this reports around Trump getting pissed off that Netanyahu was, quote, pushing him around. The U.S. is trying to get a deal done with Iran and Saudi Arabia, only for old Bibi to get involved in Trump's business, and Trump ended up having enough, completely cutting communications with Netanyahu, which, by the way, is something that hasn't happened since JFK. And for the first time in my life, I am now seeing a negative article, also the last name Friedman is interesting, about Israel. Guys, do you fully grasp what this means? This is the first time since JFK that the president has outright disrespected Israel. And we know what happened to JFK. And it's the first time in American and Israeli history that we have just cut communications. Also, our defense secretary have just canceled his visit to Israel. That's just stuff you don't do. Make sure to follow me on this, because this is incredible.
You said it, Mark. Use the word cosplay. Have at it, my friend.
Yeah, anyone who is naive and stupid enough to believe that the U.S. has cut communication, right? If there's a level quarrel between two alpha dogs, Trump and Netanyahu for the moment, that doesn't mean that U.S.-Israeli relations change, right? It is a bedrock of U.S. geopolitics. And, I mean, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt wrote the book, The Israeli Lobby, about the pernicious and malignant influence of the IPAC lobby and the Israeli influence on U.S. foreign policy. How they've essentially, I mean, when you say America first, it's often equally interpreted at the very least as Israel first, right? If not more importantly so. So, no, I don't believe there'll be any substantial real change. I think when it comes to the Middle East, I think that Trump's instinct, much like Joe Biden's instinct, was he doesn't want a war in the Middle East with Iran now, not during my administration, right? He doesn't like Iran. He probably wants war with Iran, but the U.S. can only do so many wars at a time. And that war is not a priority for them, right? They want to finish up this Ukraine thing. They want to pivot to Asia to confront China. But then again, every U.S. president since Obama has wanted to pivot to Asia to fight China. And no one has gotten there yet because they keep getting bogged down in the Middle East or now with Russia. But Biden administration, or maybe I shouldn't say the Biden administration, the Blinken and Sullivan administration went to great lengths to avoid war with Iran, no matter how hard Netanyahu wanted it, right? No matter how hard he tried to pull them in. Iran and the U.S. agreed and went through the pantomime of strikes arranged strikes to avoid going to save face for each other and to avoid going to conflict. Now, I think that there is disagreement with this on the Trump administration, that there's no coherent policy at all, right? It is different people paying court and trying to influence Trump to their agenda. It's just that 90% of the administration is pro-Israel war hawk neocons, right? However, I still think that Trump wants to bluster. He wants to threaten. He wants to, do diplomacy his mafia style way. You either give me everything I want in a deal, or I'm going to break your leg and burn down your cousin's house. Right. I mean, that's the way Trump does diplomacy, usually screaming in all capital letters about it on social media. Some people within his administration may have different ideas there, but I think the Trump administration wants to avoid direct conflict with Iran if possible. Their game with Israel is Israel will give you all the weapons you need, right? We will let you do anything and everything to the Palestinians you want. And Trump has doubled down on the Biden policy of greenlighting the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Palestine by openly saying it and promising to build a resort in its place, in the place of Gaza. But they're saying, Netanyahu, you can do whatever you want to the Palestinians, and we'll either back you to the hilt or ignore it as necessary. But we don't want to go to war with Iran for you. Not now. Maybe in a few years' time. We got other things. So that is a continuum of U.S. policy from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. Now, that being said, I had imagined what was going to come out of U.S.-Iranian negotiations over Trump demanding a nuclear deal was a kind of JCPOA 2.0. Remember, it was Trump himself who ripped up JCPOA 1 simply because it was Obama's, for no other reason really whatsoever. But I thought JCPOA 2.0, with branded by Trump with some tacky gold lame, right? That was what the U.S. was working for. But in the last week, last 10 days or so, the Trump administration apparently has come out with new, absolutely absurd demands of Iran that there's no way that Iran can possibly meet, which include giving up in their entirety their civilian nuclear energy program, which they are entitled to under international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Russia, by the way, building the Iranians' nuclear power plant at Bushehr, so that they can conduct no nuclear enrichment whatsoever, right? That is something that a sovereign Iran cannot accept, that kind of diktat. The other thing is they're demanding that Iran stop all support to Shiite groups, the axis of resistance throughout the Middle East, because the U.S. is allowed to have and arm proxies to fight their opponents, but Iran is not. That's the way that it shakes. If the Trump administration keeps up with these demands and really goes through with bombing unless they get these demands, well, that's a whole nother cake. The other option is the Trump administration walking back from these demands. Now, the Trump administration walks back from things, stupid things it says and does all the time. The tariff war on the entire world, for instance. Now, apparently, the tariff war on China as well. So the Trump administration is capable of turning on a dime, and its fanboys in the media will be like, oh, that's what Trump intended all along. It's all Trump 5D chess, right? Instead of a fumbling clown show that's going on. But I have a question of what the Trump administration is really doing now. Are they looking for a war with Iran, or are they trying to avoid a war with Iran? I don't know. And I would venture to guess that Trump himself doesn't know yet.
Fam, did you want me to jump in, or you got something to ask? Because I was gonna just, Mark didn't completely. Well, Mark, you didn't answer my question completely. Let me just pull this up, though. I mean, you did answer a lot more than my question too, as well. But let's pull this up real quick, Jayme. Do you have it with the David Icke and the Alex Jones clip? Or you're not ready with it? I have it. I'll do it. Never mind. So everybody's favorite guy, Alex Jones. He obviously. This guy is such a frigging clown. You want to talk about a guy who's betrayed his own. Where are you going to look out for the fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset? You got to be careful for it. Now that it's here, he's denying that it's here. Sources confirmed that Alex Jones, what InfoWars reported a month ago, Trump is completely done with Netanyahu. Please buy my vitamins. And here is David Icke. David Icke says, ha ha. Take everything to be true the moment it is announced. No nuance, no context. Never wait and see how it pans out from here first. Always an opinion immediately. Never calmly wait to see why such stories have been circulated and who benefits in context of Trump's upcoming trip to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. $100 million from super Zionist Miriam Adelson to recognize the annexation of the West Bank at some point. Something we're not talking about at all, Mark, right? Like the fact that the settlers are moving in. They just made a movie about it. The guy from the BBC, Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. They're not going after just Gaza. They're going after all of Palestine.
Yeah. And Donald Trump, a lot of people feel the money that came from Marian Adelson was specifically for the Trump administration to recognize that the settlements are illegal in the West Bank, which formerly were illegally being obtained. A cabinet awash with Israeli firsters. You mentioned this too as well. Ultra Zionists in his cabinet across the board, including guys like Mike Huckabee right now, who are trying to play this other cosplay of that we care about the people when bringing food in. People arrested in universities defunded over Israel's genocide protest. Still going on. No due process over here, getting rid of some people. Removing sanctions on settlers for stealing Palestinian land and homes in the West Bank, which I just reported about. Unlimited weapon supply to Israel. They haven't stopped. In fact, once again, Donald Trump, he gave weapons to the Israeli regime that Joe Biden wouldn't give. The same thing with Kiev when he said, I gave you the javelins, Mark.
Bombs. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I gave you the javelins. He was giving you sheets. I gave you javelins. Well, the bunker busters, those 2,000-pound bombs. Even Biden said, nah, let's hold off on that. Donald Trump, here you go, which means that our personnel needs to be used to drop those bombs. But he's not owned by Israel. Wait and see. We are dealing with two narcissistic psychopaths after all. But that is from David Icke, and that is from Alex Jones.
I agree with pretty much everything he said there.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree? Because sometimes when you hear people, like Larry Johnson said the other day on Judge Knapp, which I watched that show a lot, right? He said he does believe that Trump is done with Netanyahu. I don't believe that. I believe this is cosplay. I believe there's a bigger entity behind the whole scenes that's telling Trump what to do, and everything we're seeing is theater. Do you believe that, Mark, or do you believe that actual Donald Trump and the government have free will to make decisions and try to change the course of what's going on, please?
Okay, without, there being some, giant Jewish global Illuminati conspiracy.
I didn't say it was giant
I know you did.
Illuminati.
I'm just making clear that that's not what we're talking about. I know you didn't, right?
All right.
I'm making, because some people will jump to that conclusion, right?
That's a trap.
It is a trap, right? There is a U.S. deep state, right? Ben Rhodes called it the blob, the U.S. foreign policy and security elite. If you don't want to call it the deep state, you can call it the blob. You can call it the permanent bureaucracy. The U.S. hegemony, right, has an infrastructure and an impetus that even though Trump has tried to challenge parts of it, right, largely for domestic political reasons and refashion it with his own political loyalists, right? Like he has done with the NED now, restoring funding now that he's got political control of it. But yeah, there is a weight, and the US president has limited range of options. To narrow that options even further, he hired a bunch of neocons. And those neocons come to him with a select set of policy prescriptions based on their own and on that hegemony's agenda, right? And so that limits his options even further. So no, the U.S. president can't just do whatever he wants in foreign policy. In the first administration, he wanted some type of peace deal with North Korea, and John Bolton tanked that and has bragged about it ever since. Right? It's the same thing here. When it comes down to it, Trump really doesn't know that much about international relations in the world. Right? Neither does his chosen loyal political envoy, Steve Witkoff, who can't even name, is the primary person for not only all of Trump's negotiations, right? This real estate developer, a New York real estate developer, but he's the primary point man on Russia and Ukraine, and he couldn't even name the 4 regions of Ukraine that Russia says are its, and the Kiev regime says are its own. Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk. So neither him nor his top people are necessarily the most educated, the most informed about international relations in the world. And evidently they don't really rely on experts. They don't necessarily trust the experts, the policy people, right? Which means they're not necessarily weighed down by that deep state ideology. But when it always comes down to these B grade neocons, right? The neocons that Trump brought in because he believed that they were more politically loyal to him than they did to their geopolitical ideology. I don't know. I'm not so sure that, that whole thing seems to have been playing out with the melodrama around Mike Waltz, right? There's 2 different stories about why he has been shuffled out of national security advisor and into, what is a position that Trump intends as a measure of contempt at the institution, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, because we know Trump hates the UN. So whoever he sends there, is just meant to dump that contempt on the UN, as he did with John Bolton in the first administration.
Yeah. Bam.
Yeah. I think it's just ridiculous that people are buying into it. I mean, it's just beyond ridiculous. I mean, we have the most.
If there's a lover's quarrel between the 2 alpha dogs, right? Between Trump and Netanyahu, it's moot. It doesn't matter, right? Eventually, they'll have to get back together and talk or whatever, because there's too much deep state apparatus behind both of them, too much U.S. and Israeli geopolitical interests in the Middle East and elsewhere locked in. It almost really it matters to a very little extent, whether Trump is putting Netanyahu on the couch tonight or not.
I believe there's like a globalist entity that's even sitting higher than the deep state. And but I do believe, and I could be wrong about this, that like China and Russia have kind of broke with it. They're not playing it anymore. They don't care about Klaus Schwab. They don't care about the Great Reset. But I do believe there's an agenda that sits above what's going on, because the part that's really disturbing to me, Mark, is that on day 2, and you heard all these, populist right people when they were talking about, bringing in Donald Trump. The one thing he was supposed to stop was the 4th Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset, right? The track and trace systems, the play by the globalists to put us in a position where their power can never be challenged ever again. And that was also to the track and trace policies. He brought in guys like Larry Ellison from Oracle, who literally want to have an mRNA AI vaccine that goes into your body and read your body's type and make an mRNA vaccine for your DNA. And Sam Altman, these people that he brought in, and he's pushing the AI. We still have in America right now the Real ID program that's going forth. And the evidence that leads me to believe this stuff, the greatest example will be when the Rockefellers changed the whole medical system about 100 years ago, 125 years ago, I believe it was, when they saw that you can make medicines from petroleum-based products, that they didn't give a damn about traditional medicine at the time, and they changed the whole game. So I do feel like there's this kind of Rockefeller, Rothschild sitting above everything, and this is cosplay in front of us. and they're going to move us closer into the fourth industrial revolution. So I was kind of curious to where you stand on that, because you hear a lot of generals or a lot of, ex-military men that have a lot of great analogies and understanding exactly what's going on in the battlefield and whatnot. But they're still talking as if what's going on with Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has free will and could change this. You know what I'm saying? That's when I see the media go into play, and I see the Maha and the MAGA media, like these kids go into play, because this is done on a big level. I mean, there's people like, Mario on the Wall and Nick Sorter and Benny Johnson. I don't mention these names to hate on them, but MAGA has its own media in social media, and they go right into play with this stuff. Even Jackson Hinkle was putting out shit there to praise Donald Trump and the moves he's making right now, which is just kind of like, oh my God, this is mind-boggling right here. You know what I'm saying? There are other people. And I don't know if you've heard the report from Catherine Austin Fitz about the world, the Disneylands that are underground right now, where the elite have built for themselves over the past 20-something years. So in case of a nuclear war, which is part of their Malthusiast plan, they can go underground for 10 years, Mark, and then pop up later to restart Adam and Eve style this world. So I don't know. I think people need to look more to that, what's going on, and at least reach a happy medium and understand that, the Republicans are no different than the Democrats. Trump is no different than Biden. I mean, they're all the same. And at the end of the day, they don't care about any of us. Sorry for babbling on.
No. I mean, I believe in common agendas, ideologies, and interests that drive a lot of people at the superstate level, right? Capitalists be capitalists. Right. People with money associate with each other. They're part of a common community of vision. They have common values, if you want to call them that. And they informally, right, associate and talk to and make plans with each other. Right. Some of these things like what is these supposedly pagan elite festivals that they talk about. I think sometimes they're blown out of proportion. But if you want to take a look at what a real superstate open conspiracy, if you want to say, looks like, that brings together people, political and wealthy elites across the world, and weds them to policy and agenda, it's the Trilateral Commission, right? That is a real entity, a real structure. It's not a global government, but it brings together agendas and interests between political and wealthy elite and sets vision and direction. And that's what I think does have influence, right? It's not quite puppet strings, but it is a tune that they all dance to.
Yeah. You said you don't believe in the I forgot the name of the pagan things, like the bloodlines and the what's it called? That Alex Jones once reported on.
Yeah, they always go and try.
They go and they wear the outfits, and it's like they made movies about this, and
that stuff is. I mean, there's some of it. But it's blown out of proportion, right? Like I said, if you want to talk about a real one,
see Epstein Island and tell me it's blown out of proportion. I was saying that there's some serious crazy pagan.
That is an entirely different Mossad level can of worms. Right?
I don't know. Fam, you got any last questions for Mark? I can talk to this guy till the cows come home.
No, that's it, Mark. Thank you so much for your input and insight. It was great to hear. I haven't heard from you in a while, so it was great to hear you put out a different perspective.
I was like, oh, it's Fiorella. I wonder what she's been up to. Bohemian Grove. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I don't know. There's a video out there supposedly that says Hillary Clinton's extracting adrenochrome.
Fiorella? Are you still in Moscow?
Yeah, I am.
I didn't even know that.
Unbelievable. Yeah, she's the best networker in the world, that girl. That's why. I'd be at your house 3 times a week going, what's going on? What's the wife making for dinner tonight? Is borscht on the menu?
What's the wife making for dinner? What's pasta making for dinner tonight?
Listen, I had a dream last night, which you've kind of crushed my dream because, once again, hoping that this could be it, hoping that sanctions could be lifted, hoping that Sputnik and RT could be back in business. I mean, I saw the video with Rick Sanchez going on Tucker and explaining when I know, Mark, but still, when
I've been on Rick. I love Rick. I've been on his show several times before, right?
Okay. Whatever the case may be, he talked about when Larry King called him, and Larry King said, you got to come on this network. Ed Schultz has said this before. You get more journalistic freedom over there at RT. And RT really had what I called the anti-imperialist leftist mindset that didn't buy into the culture war bullshit. People like Garland Nixon, people like yourself, people like Rachel Blevins. That's not around now. That's not representative in any media whatsoever, whether it be mainstream or independent. It's getting shut down and shut out.
I got to tell you, though, the people who turn into RT, they don't want to hear Ed Schultz and Larry King and Rick Sanchez. They don't. They want to hear real alternative media figures. I think that's just a mistake RT continually makes. They go after big names that they, rightly co-opt in, but I don't think it gets them any results. When's the last time you ever saw anyone on social media share a Rick Sanchez or a Larry King or an Ed Schultz video?
Well, I think Rick Sanchez has had some videos. Rick Sanchez was at least doing what Peter Lavelle was doing too as well, reaching out to independent voices and getting them on there. So I think there was a little bit of play over there. Beside the point, they said there's more journalistic freedom over there at RT. They don't always play it right now, and it seems like they've moved away from what they would consider to be the woke left. And they really attached their trailer to all these right-wing populist, the whole tenant media, they were all fucking, excuse my French, all Zionist, right? Benny.
Mark and I are like,
well, RT has its petty political interests and intrigues and arguments.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I've been a contributor to RT for years at some level, to Sputnik even more so, right? But I mean, there's no journalistic perfection out there. I'll just leave it out, except of course,
unless
for the Convo couch /truth.
You're independent.
Well, and I just want to say,
unless you're
Craig,
independent, you really.
You keep talking about hope, right? You know me,
Mark. I made a pilot, for crying out loud. I got a pilot here. I need RT to come back. Crying out loud.
I made a pilot too, and RT trashed it years ago. Anyway,
well, they were wrong for doing that. You know what I'm saying? But you got to keep trying. We got to see.
Anyway, you're right. You call me the cynic and the black pill. I own that, right? I mean, I make no regards, right? I don't do hope, right? There's a kind of philosophical conversation between a shall we say a cynical philosopher and a aspiring good doer in the world, and he said hope is the denial of reality, and the person asked back to him, are you saying we shouldn't hope? And he said, hope is the carrot dangled before the mule to keep it plodding along. What I'm saying is you should remove the carrot and walk forward anyway.
Yeah. And Burgess Meredith said in the movie Grumpier Old Men, you wish? Well, you should wish in one hand and crap in the other, and tell me which one gets filled first.
That's another way of putting it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark
Sleboda, the black pill, the nihilist,
I'm not a nihilist.
He's not as black pilled as I am. I think I'm worse.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm here to balance you out. So, but Mark, thank you so much for coming on. Seriously, and all kidding aside, I mean, I look at your Twitter sometimes, and I see the followers you get, and I just think it's a shame because I think you.
I've been trimmed by Twitter for.
Oh, we all have.
years.
We all have.
Yeah.
I'm
not allowed to grow anymore.
It's team sports. If you play team sports, though, Mark, you know what I'm saying? Then you get.
If you love Trump a little bit.
Yeah.
Elon.
Yeah.
Not happening.
Not happening at all. That's why we love you. But
Exactly.
listen, when I get to Russia, I am going to be getting in there and cooking young. I got a whole meal planned.
You can come to Russia anytime. You've just chosen not to. Okay, you can come to Russia. We're waiting.
Do you have room to host a party at your house, fam? Or do I have to ask Mark? Do we have to host it at his house? You know what I'm saying?
You should host it at his because he has the crows.
Because I want to do a 12-person dinner.
I live in the southern outskirts of Moscow, out next to a forest reserve that is like an hour by metro away from everywhere, right? The furthest point out. So no one wants to be in the area where I'm in, except for me, believe me.
My friend Fred Edward, a follower of the show, longtime guy, one of the original guys, he says he wants to talk to Mark about his crow. He's a parrot guy, but crows intrigue me.
My crows are rescue crows. They all have wing or talon injuries. They can't be returned to the wild. That's why they're with me.
Yeah. No, they have freedom. They're moving around, and you know.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're also black-billed crows.
They guide. They're my spiritual guides. They're my Hugin and Munin.
Mark, I hope you're wrong and they reach a deal and sanctions are lifted and everything ends and we're back to work tomorrow. Let's hope that happens.
All right. My Lord, kumbaya.
Get out of here, you crazy son of a bitch. We love you. Thank you so much.
Good night, Mark.
You're the best.
Love you guys.
Love you guys. Man, I love you. Mark Sleboda, ladies and gentlemen.
Pasta, I agree with Mark, man. You were just a little bit too, I don't know. There's a difference between optimism and idiocy, you know? Just don't cross that line, you know what I mean? Like it, and yeah. You can't put your eggs in a basket. And further, there's
no baskets out here, fam. We're talking about, okay, so I kind of spilt the beans, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be showing, I made a pilot, and it wasn't just a small pilot. It was a big pilot. Fam got to meet the members. She was here in town. You know, we called the show Wake Up America. Johnny came down and produced and directed and edited the whole thing. It's great work. We're going to show it out there very shortly because we want to, with the sanctions not being lifted, you know, when I started getting on the project, we had heard months ago, everybody was optimistic that, you know, Sputnik and RT would be returning to the United States. Now, I got no promises from them, so they might have done the same thing to Mark that they would do to me, you know, and say no and yets and get out of here. But I was taking a chance. I'm not going to get called on a third strike. I'm going to swing the bat. But the thing that's really disturbing, fam, that I've found out more than anything is that there's no avenues for independent media out here to thrive at all. Do anything. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think that if there's a conservative channel, we call it Wake Up America. You can call it the horseshoe theory, but we have 4 co-hosts and it's all in different parts of the political spectrum. Me on the left, we have an ANCAP in the mid.
Guys, wait, left. Sorry, yeah. Pasta. Pasta's on the left in this show. He's the most left on this show. That's all I'm gonna say. All right, continue.
Okay. Then the next to me, from left to right, was a libertarian, an ANCAP, which is no such thing, fam would say, as an anarcho-capitalist. But okay, next to her is a truther, somebody in the truther community, leaning more to the right, and all the way to the right was a populist right conservative. There, so on the screen from left to right, and I called it Wake Up America, and we go into it. We have conversations. And it's great. I don't think there's anything like it on TV. I think it's great. You know what I'm saying? But yet the real story is you can't get it anywhere because, like you said, fam, if you're not praising Donald Trump or if you're not hating Donald Trump, if you're not playing the team sports, red team, blue team mentality, there's no opportunities for us out there. And that's really depriving the public of what the media is supposed to be, to hold power accountable and have conversations and discourse across the board. To me, that's the real story. Not just because I did it and I think it's great and I want to find a home for it, but the fact is that we're going to deprive the public of these conversations and in these discussions and real representation. I mean, I am the furthest left on the show. Okay. But if I went on any news network, MSNBC or CNN, I'd be so far left of anybody that's there. So far left of anybody that's there. You know what I'm saying? They might bring on somebody who believes in culture war leftist bullshit, but as an anti-imperialist mindset, pro-speech, pro-free journalism, right? I mean, there's nobody like that on mainstream media. Also, too, to tell you the truth, they don't have a lot of they have a lot of libertarians. We do have Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams out there who are kind of holding that space down, but it's not all over the TV. You get Thomas Massey coming on or Rand Paul coming on, sometimes saying some stuff, but it's very underrepresented. Then the truther, which is the conspiracy theorist truther, that person would probably be more of a threat to the networks than me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that person is the person they don't want to say any stuff about. They don't want to have those conversations about Bahamian Groves or any of the bloodline stuff or any of that kind of, even though, but RT, once again, Peter Lavelle, on the last show that I did, Johnny Vedmore was on. So they're starting to bring in people in that community and starting to have conversations with them on RT that you would never have. Johnny Vedmore would never, or Whitney Webb would never, or Jason Burmis would never. You know, the Last American Vagabond never, ever gets chances to talk about what they talk about on a mainstream media platform. Never. And then, you know, the person that is represented a lot in the independent media right now, Gerard Michaels, who is our conservative, our populist right comedian, I mean, he gets representation everywhere. So now that person who has that representation has legitimate pushback. And that's something that depriving the public of right now, I think, is so awful. It's just terrible. It's the real story here that media is more suppressed now than it was under the Biden administration when it was really bad, fam.
It's the same type of suppression. I mean, it's pretty bad all around. Yeah, I mean, we've been on the show for a while. I just wanted to say, like, it's really hard to be independent, to get 100% free autonomy over how you want to conduct, report news, unless you're independent. And there's really no other way of putting it, especially with a network. Like, very much operates very much like mainstream media internally. And that's something that you wouldn't know unless you were working for a network like that and you had to abide by certain things. It depends, like, how willing you would be to do it, to abide by certain things. I think that's why also people from mainstream media can sort of like accustom to it better, because they've already done it before. But in terms of coming from an independent side and going into it, I think it's a lot different than you think. It would be great to have free reign and do your own show. But again, like, even your show would still be like more here and to the right. You wouldn't have an overarching like leftist. You wouldn't have someone to your left talking to the far right conservative, because then you would get into conversations that maybe wouldn't be well received, right? So even in those areas, there's still barriers, right? I think the real challenge is to really create our own media and to get it seen and conducting it in a way that is different, because everybody's now trying to copy what we were doing like 7 years ago, right? Like, everybody's already like, it's kind of like the independent media sphere has been captured with the mainstream alternative media. They've copied everything that those of us who have been around for a while were doing, and they've just made it about like geopolitics, but they've kind of put in this whole spin of like just talking about the superficialities of this breaking news. They're not really going in deeper. And like, at the very least, even though I agree with a lot of what Mark said, but I didn't agree with all of it. At the very least, Mark does go deeper than the average person that, that goes on and has a YouTube show where that interviews people. He's someone that goes deeper, and that not just pick a team or just, go on with the surface level analysis that we see everywhere is very rare, but it's still taking time to like, for people to catch that, because in social media, the best thing that you can have is like, oh, look what Trump's doing. Trump's great. Look, he's really doing it. It's that, oh, quick sensationalism. And I think like fighting against that is what's done best, like, so props for you trying. And, I think at some point, the more you try, you will eventually, I'm not going to berate that. But I don't think with Russia, going back to Russia, I don't even think that if we got some sort of end to the Ukraine war, a momentary end, that the sanctions would be the first thing to go. That it's just not where the priorities are for Russia or for the US. It's just not there. They really, right now, what could happen is what's happening now is there's funding behind the scenes, off-brand stuff that is Russian funded, but is not in name. So I think that's probably the way you would want to go.
We'll see.
Because everything else is just captured.
Well, who knows? I mean, you know what I'm saying? We don't know where we're going to be. You know what I'm saying? We don't know. I mean, I just want to continue to do these shows with you too as well. You know, I want to continue to do my WBAI show. I'd like to expand that, which is another problem now because now it's Pacifica, right? And when you say, like, there's nobody left to me, well, I'm the furthest right that Pacifica will have. They'll never have a conservative run a channel over there. You know what I'm saying? But it will be me and Scott Horton will be the furthest right they'll ever go. You know what I'm saying? That's it. You know,
you're left of Scott.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I'm surprised that they're letting Scott, but Scott sticks to the war stuff. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't talk about like, you know, a domestic policy. He sticks to the anti-war mentality, and him and those guys are great over there. Dave DeCamp is one of my favorite human beings. His work is just amazing. So I'm really appreciative of him. Kyle Anzalone, love his work too as well. But yeah, fam, thank you so much, Friendly Brilliant. We love you too. You know, it's just a shame what they've done to us throughout the whole years and stuff. You know, the demonetization, the shadow banning, you know, even with my new channel now, I've had a crazy year. A lot of things go on, you know, including my mother having a stroke and having me to move home and take some time off. But even still, so many of our videos were being demonetized over there, every single one. And there's no way to see exactly what they're doing. We still don't have open source systems. We have no transparency. And like I said, it's worse now than it was in the Biden administration because nobody's even talking about it now. You know, Donald Trump signed a baseless, meaningless executive order about free speech on the radios and the TVs, and it meant nothing. Nothing's been done. And, you know, Twitter's become such just a Trump spot now. It's so crazy. Remember when they couldn't even, they did all this on purpose. This is all cosplay. So, you know, I don't know, fam. Do you want to talk about the Israel-Russia situation, Israel situation anymore? Or do you think we said enough?
I think we said enough. I mean, all I said it's essentially what I tried to say earlier is like, I just think it's ridiculous to see like very smart people try to convince themselves we have the most Zionist administration. Donald Trump just gave the green light when it comes to Israel literally implementing the final solution into Gaza. We have a Congress controlled by AIPAC. We have the administration in charge of implementing Greater Israel. They're the ones that are going to push Greater Israel. We have Donald Trump's vested interest, as Mark had mentioned, in building real estate in Gaza. And you have, of course, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, involved in that. You have the entirety now of the media suddenly shift and talk about this. And somehow people think this is just normal, that it's not like some sort of psyop, that is not narrative management, that Trump's really just going to go against Netanyahu because suddenly he had a hallelujah moment and is really going to take on the evil Zionists. No, he's not. Like, it's just the actions, the meeting that he also had a secret meeting with one of the Israeli representatives. The meetings he's having, the meetings Russia is having with Iran, because there's also that meeting, and that Trump is going to have in Saudi Arabia, had in Qatar. All of these conversations taking place are all part of that. They're not disconnected. And I think people aren't looking at what's not being talked about, which is what's happening behind the scenes of what you're seeing. So you're just seeing this Trump-Netanyahu feud, which, by the way, do you guys remember when they talked about Trump and Netanyahu having a feud months ago, if you recall, in the beginning?
Putting him on a leash, man.
And then what happened to that? How many times do you have to listen to people who are constantly wrong, who just put out this information flat out because it gets a lot of clicks on X? And X is a pro-Trump, pro-Elon Musk platform. And if you've noticed, that's just how it works for the most part. Like, that's mostly how it works. So if you don't do that, you just completely, I had to shut off my replies because all I get is the what is it, crypto bot constantly, just, and every single tweet, and that basically takes you off the algorithm. So that's why I've shut down my responses, not because I don't want them, but because like I just keep getting completely spammed. And so that is how X works now. It's pay for play as well. It's completely ruined whatsoever. And you're right. I mean, we have less and less and less ways of getting our message out there. But I will say at least Substack has now a way to stream live on Substack. It seems to be a decent platform for now in terms of getting people to go there. So I advocate for people to start using it and start looking at channels that are on Substack, because it seems like it's better than everything else that's out there, at least in my experience. And the people that go on Substack are looking for something deeper than just what's, you know, on X or YouTube or wherever else. And Rumble is also like captured. I mean, they only promote, for the most part, you know, right wing type of news. So it's getting really hard. But yeah, you just gotta, what are you gonna do? Shut up and stop talking about the things that matter? No, I mean, we just gotta go and find different ways of getting yourself out there. So
yeah, I'm going to go back to the restaurant business and do a podcast on fantasy football. That's my plan moving forward. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Fam, you have to give us some links too soon on so we can put down below. But there are individual links in which you can help us on out, help out the show, help out independent media. We want to thank you so much for joining in today. Jayme CheeseSlice on the 1s and 2s. Fam, Fiorella for live from Moscow, and me, Craig Pasta Jardula, here rocking it. Thank you so much. We'll see you back on Friday. I got the show on Wednesday, WBAI, 4 p.m. Eastern. We want to invite you to join. Misty Winston came on last week before her show that's now on Rumble that she's doing with Due Dissonance on their channel. Thank you so much, Ficus. So, you know, she came on Wednesday. This Wednesday, excuse me, we're going to have Jose Vegas stop on by and jump on and talk about what's going on in Israel, Palestine too, as well, because he's running against Richie Torres in his district over there. God bless him. And he's pushing for peace out there in the Bronx. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on Friday, guys. For Craig Pasta, Jardula, Fiorella Isabel, Jayme CheeseSlice on the 1s and 2s. It was TruthWire time. Truth out.
we'll see you next time, yo. Bye.